hello and welcome to today's CCMA online seminar. I'm Lee Hopwood, CEO here at the CCMA, and today we'll be exploring the challenge of creating a culture for innovation. Now, this is something that we've been talking about for a few months around innovation, and it's clearly really important when you think about the pressures that our industry is going through and the pressures that we're all going through, those constant tweaks and changes is going to be really, really important. To help with this debate, I've invited a few friends to join me. So please welcome LV's Director of Culture and CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility, Rodney Assock. We have author of Employee Experience by Design, How to Create an Effective EX for Competitive Advantage. And Belinda is also one of HR Magazine's most influential thinkers of 2022. So delighted to have Belinda Ganaway with us. And Ash Hallett, who is the VP for Northern Europe at UJet. And UJet is a CCaaS provider that's stormed the market this year and is clearly in the market with a very clear message around innovation. So welcome, guys. How are you doing this morning? You all good?
All good, thanks. Yep.
Doing very good, thank you.
Excellent. So let's start by really understanding what we're asking here. So what do we mean by innovation? Ash? Oh, I'm going to ask you just as you take a cup of tea.
That's all right. Born ready, no problem. Innovation is a really interesting one for me. I think, and I think especially the subject of culture of innovation, because we hear innovation a huge amount. At every single show, at every single webinar, everywhere we hear about innovation with regards to technology, and that's one side of the argument. But for me, culture is really interesting, and I think certainly something that's been put out in the Good Practice Guide as well, around making sure that we actually don't immediately revert back to pre-pandemic thinking. So for me, innovation when it comes to culture is actually looking at what different individuals can bring you, rather than pigeonholing them to a role or a responsibility or a sort of traditional thought process around what that person should be capable of. I think it's really tapping into what their skill set brings to the role and what that can bring to the wider organization and how we can innovate based on that.
Nice, nice. Belinda, is there anything that you can add to what do we mean by innovation?
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that Ash has gone in for the tricky bit, which is the sort of like what underpins it. I've gone for the easy answer of this. I'm going to go for the easy answer, which is actually what does innovation even mean? I think like a lot of these words, there are so many different definitions, whether it's academic or sort of in the common dialogue around this. For me, innovation is about the practical implementation of ideas that leads to the introduction of something new. I think it can often get reduced down to it's about having lots and lots of ideas. And don't get me wrong, I think ideas are fabulous. But the tricky bit of innovation is about implementing some of these ideas, and as that they have to create some sort of change. That's often just described as creating something new product, services, change in some sort of system or process, but equally it might actually be the removal of one of those parts as well. So it's about bringing about change, so the practical implementation of ideas that brings about some sort of change. That for me is the simplest definition of innovation.
And I guess innovation, we quite often think about innovation in technology. But actually innovation comes from all sorts of forms. It is in processes, it is in so many other forms. Is that something that works with you, Belinda?
Absolutely. Innovation is about creating change, introducing something new or removing something to create some sort of change. And that could be the solution or the enabler or the lever of that could be about technology, but equally it can be about how we as individuals interact with each other.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So let's look at the other big word that we're using in this, culture. What do we mean by culture? That is another big word. Rodney, you're LV, you're at LV, you are Director of Culture and CSR. What does culture mean to you?
I think it means all sorts, really. I mean, ultimately, culture is sort of defining it as actually this is how we do things around here. And I think just picking up on Belinda's point there around, it's how you interact with everybody to actually make things happen and go forwards. That's what your culture is about, isn't it? It's about how you interact, but it's also, I guess, as leaders, as business leaders, whatever it might be within your organisation, it's how you create that environment for that to thrive. And for me, when you kind of link innovation and culture together, it's about kind of creating that that space to actually allow that to happen. And for me, that feels like being really kind of focused on your people, you know, make sure that they know that they are cared about. And ultimately they'll look after your customers, which, you know, which obviously keeps us in business. And the way to kind of do that, I think, for me, is around sort of that environment's around sort of creating that genuine empowerment and enablement to actually sort of have a go at stuff that might be different, come up with ideas. And actually, not all of them are going to be good, but they're going to be an idea. And that's a starting point, isn't it, to kind of build upon. So for me, that's where the kind of connection, I guess, between culture and innovation kind of fits together for me.
Nice. So one of the things that I just want to say, now that we've got some of those definitions, we know the kind of scope, if you like, that we're going to talk about. For those of you that are watching, if you've got any comments, you've got any questions you want to share, please do use the chat. I am monitoring it. So if there's anything you want to share, anything you want to say, please do put it into the chat. And hey, what's your definition of innovation and culture? So Belinda, when we were talking the other day, you said something that I thought was worth sharing today. And it was about how a great employee experience is the foundation for creating innovation. Please, could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. When I first started working this whole area of employee experience, the evidence that supported the business case for focusing on creating a great experience for employees was quite anecdotal. And over the years has become more and more quantifiable, more and more stats, really looking at the range of benefits that come from creating a great employee experience for your people. And one of my favorite comes from Gartner, which is that organizations that deliver a strong employee experience according to their people, so it's their employees' experience, you know, their views that matter, they're 89% more likely to meet innovation goals. So I'm going to just repeat that. I think it stands repetition. Organizations whose employees have a good employee experience, those organizations are 89% more likely to meet their innovation goals. Now, so this is serious stuff, and that's just one of the benefits of creating a great employee experience. But the question is kind of like, why? Or how are those two connected? I think it comes back to that kind of like definition that I like around innovation, which is ideas and then implementing them. So what we know is ideas, great ideas for improvement, new products, services, innovation of any sort can come from anywhere. So not just from the top, not just from product development, but from anywhere. And actually from people most closely connected to the customer, they see this live every day. So ideas can come from anywhere, but implementing them is often the hard bit. And I don't think you get anywhere with either of those two elements, the idea generation or implementing them, unless people are really invested, i.e. they care, they belong, they feel happy, if you like, they feel safe. That's a massively important one. They're energized and they're up for a challenge, because creating new stuff is harder than maintaining the old stuff, right? So all of those come from delivering a great or a strong employee experience. So that's, for me, it's that link. You need to create those magic ingredients and those magic environment around investment, caring, belonging, all of those good stuff, in order for people to be willing to go the extra mile to come up with the ideas and then support implementation.
Interesting. And I'm going to come back to the comment you said there about people being safe, and I'm going to ask Rodney about that in a second. There is a comment in the chat, which I think also can be applied to creating that excellent employee experience. Culture can be a slow burner, especially when an organisation has established personnel that are reluctant to embrace new change and innovation. Just got to keep chipping away. Rodney, one of the things that Belinda said there was around employees being safe, feeling safe. And I guess that's safe to share ideas, but I guess it's also safe in themselves. Rodney, what's your view on that, and what have been your experiences around that connection between a great employee experience and innovation?
I think I couldn't agree anymore. Actually, it is about creating that safe environment for that to happen. You know, for any great idea, there's probably about 99 bad ones, you know, which are coming. Actually, when they're not even bad, they're just basically that they don't work, perhaps, you know, as well as perhaps the one that might actually be the one that you choose. And I think it's funny, actually, I remember visiting somewhere once, I'm not going to say where actually there was a discussion about innovation and culture and actually what it was like. And the people that we spoke to in that business area actually were in the space where they were kind of saying we couldn't possibly say what was wrong with the business because we'd be told off, and actually could actually be faced and the boss wouldn't like that, for example. So I actually witnessed that at an organisation. When we then did sort of discuss the current opportunity about, but if you create that safe space, you're going to get improvements that come from it, because the people that know best are the ones who are doing the work. They're in the work. They're kind of in the space of actually understanding what's working, what's not. If you're not going to listen to that voice, then what are you going to do about it? And I think for me, it's about being able to kind of sort of raise those ideas and actually sort of be in a position to kind of sort of say, thank God we found it, rather than actually, oh my God, someone's going to get in trouble as a result of finding something that which isn't going right, because ultimately that's going to continue getting worse and worse, isn't it? So for me, that safe space piece is absolutely crucial, I think, in terms of being able to do that, learn from what hasn't worked, if that's the case, and find a way of dealing with it. I suppose ultimately, that's why I tend to that safe space and kind of culture innovation element of what's going on about it. And I think for me, it's around, if you can generate that, then people will be more willing to come up with new ideas and suggestions and so on. And I think creating that environment where basically there is genuinely an opportunity to listen and to do something about it and to just explore, even to find out more and actually explain to people, well, look, we'd love to do it. Here's the reasons why we can, and here's the reasons why we can't do it right now. At all costs, avoid saying but explain why it is that's actually, the reasons why things can't actually be implemented at that point in time. It's a priority thing, it's a money thing, it's whatever, but these people understand. And then they'll start thinking creatively again, well, how do I get around the money thing then? Is there a better way? And the rest of it, and you'll generate that continuous improvement kind of like cycle. And I think for me also, the other thing which is really important about that safe space is to actually celebrate it when it goes well, is to, it's to recognise, I guess, the people that have actually sort of stepped forward and bothered to actually put their head above the parapet and give it a go, because that creates opportunities for others to think, actually, it's all right, and let it kind of fester in that way. And that's how you build that kind of environment to actually make it continue.
Do you know what, as you were talking there now, I was thinking, how, if you're in an environment that maybe majority or some people don't feel safe, how do you create that safe space? And I think that was a great piece of advice there, Rodney. It's actually celebrating all ideas, even if some don't happen, and that feedback loop. And I guess one of the really kind of leaning on that, one of the fundamental ingredients for creating a great employee experience to support innovation are things like appreciation. Belinda, tell us a little bit more about what you see are the key ingredients.
Thank you. Yeah. So my co-author, Emma Bridger, is a psychologist, and she has spent 10 years researching what makes a great employee experience. And she's and this is based on conversations with hundreds of people, thousands of people in hundreds of organizations around the world, all sorts of organizations. So sort of knowledge-based workers sitting in lovely offices or home offices to people working on oil rigs. So really the whole gambit. And she's managed to distill it down to 7 core ingredients that contribute to a great employee experience. Now, just a sort of slight tangent and safety notice on this, which is there are also lots of individual drivers, what makes a great employee experience. That could be about you as an individual, where you're working, what you do, who you are, what you need from that particular job. So there's lots of individual drivers as well. But these are the 7 drivers that people talk about what makes a great experience for them at work. These are the 7 things that come up. And she's boiled it down to magica. So these are meaning. So connected to, I find a meaning is purposeful for me. Autonomy. I've got some sense of self-determination of how I approach this job. There's a lot of, we could talk about all of these in a great deal of depth. Growth. I can grow and move on. Impact. I know that what I do makes a difference. Challenge. Work doesn't need to be easy. We like to test ourselves. Running a marathon isn't easy, but it's still an amazing experience, right? So connection, to feel connected to each other, the social bits, and to the purpose of the organization. And also coming back to one that Rodney talks about, is appreciation. People like to feel valued and recognized for doing a great job. So that's Magica in a nutshell. There's so much more about this in the book, and Emma writes extensively and talks extensively on this topic as well. But I think it's so easy to see how all of those 7 elements could be seen to touch upon this culture of innovation that we're talking about today.
Interesting, and that also leads into what Janet has put in the chat. In my experience, creating a culture where people are encouraged, trusted to try new things, which leads to innovation initiatives being delivered. So I think that trust also comes into it, which is, I know it was a big word, it was a word that was really bandied about a lot just before the pandemic, and that was kind of it was one of the big topics, wasn't it? Trust for both customers and employees. So it's interesting to see that, I think, is an important aspect.
Can I just add to it very briefly, because there's often employee experience and culture talked about in the same breath, but it's not always clear. We've talked about what we mean by culture, but it's not always clear what the relationship between employee experience and culture. I've heard, this isn't mine, somebody else's, somebody talked about culture being the soup within which employee experience swims. So put that another way, you can imagine having, just because you have a great culture doesn't mean that you're going to have a great employee experience. But if you flip it, you're never going to have a great employee experience if you've got a really toxic culture. So it's, one impacts the other massively, but they are two distinct things.
Interesting. Rodney, do you have a view on that?
I totally agree. I think it is about that whole piece. I mean, you can throw money at something and not have a culture, can't you? And it's exactly the same sort of way of, you can build a lovely flash looking office and so on, but if it doesn't have that vibe of trust and empowerment and belonging and all those things that we talked about. And I really like the Magica, so like analogy in terms of all of that. I think it's really good to kind of look at one of those points. I've totally backed that up in terms of that particular view. I think it makes perfect sense.
Thank you. And so Pauline has said in the chat, which leads me quite nicely onto my next question. So a key to creating a successful environment lies with active involvement of the teams, suggesting the ideas for innovation into design and delivery. This embraces the ownership empowerment dimensions and helps increase chances of success. So that kind of starts to lean into the why and that active involvement of the team. So the great employee experience, actually that comes about through engagement. So I guess there's an element of there's this whole engagement piece here is really, really essential for innovation. Ash.
Yeah,
do you agree?
Well, a couple of points that I'd make there, and the first, I think, from what we were discussing previously, the points made by Belinda and Rodney, are certainly backed up by what Paul says there, and I think it all underlies on trust. Now, it's funny that when we talk about trust, and I noticed it even just then, we all naturally lean towards, do we trust our teams? Whereas, or, do we trust our staff with doing X, Y, Z? Do we trust them with their ideas around innovation and new suggestions? But what we should actually focus on, I feel, and if it is Paul, as in Paul Greenwood, that has made that comment, then it'll be very ironic to the point that I'm about to make. But I've noticed something that Paul Greenwood at Ocado is doing recently is what he calls walks with the boss. And what I see that as is he's gaining his team's trust. So it's sort of putting the shoe on the other foot a little bit, right? Now, much as Rodney said there around, it's all very well and good creating a beautiful office and great perks and free lunches and whatever else it may be. But if we don't go right back to the foundation of all those old adages of treating others as you expect to be treated and, gaining our team's trust, they're never going to step forward with their best and brightest ideas because they won't feel as if they're in that safe space, right? And I was thinking about this just prior to this call, actually, that, a very easy analogy to think of is, if you were with a friend or a family member that was going through a very difficult time, they're not about to tell you about that on the tube or, in a busy coffee shop or something like that. They're not just going to, open up. But if you go for a walk with them, if you catch them one-on-one, if you invite them and gain their trust in that way, then you're going to get the real picture, right? And you're going to get the in this example, the real innovation out of them. So, I really, really back Rodney on what he said around that environment piece. Personally, I'm working from home right now. I think an office space is, I wouldn't go as far as overrated, but I think people put too much weight on it. Personally, I spend a lot of our one-to-ones now with our team. Our office is just by St. Catherine's Docks by Tower Bridge, and we do a loop around the docks just to get outside, experience a different environment and feel in a more relaxed space to do that. And I think if we don't have that foundational level of us working to gain our team's trust, then we're never going to be in the position that we can actually trust them to do anything, because that we didn't set the precedent from the first book.
And Ash, how do you, so you're obviously responsible for the whole of Northern Europe. So you're going to have teams, people that you're working with across Europe. How do you create that trust? How do you build those relationships when you're working in that environment where arguably it's remotely?
Lots of Google Translate. No. No. So honestly, I think it comes down to, I do personally, I do two things. I try to get to know people on a personal level before I do on a work level. So I actually do the same with interviews. You know, my first question in interviews is, tell me about you. And I caveat that with, you can tell me about your career and walk me down your CV, as we traditionally do in interviews, if you really want. But I'd like to know, you know, where did you last go on holiday? Why did you go there? What did you get up to? You know, I'd like to actually understand you as a person. And if we start any one-to-ones, any meetings, anything like that, and I know it's almost becoming cheesy these days, but in a positive way, in the sense that if we ask people really how they are first, then they will actually understand that we do care about them. And I personally do. I'm sure many people on the call do. It's not all about metrics and you know, making good revenue come the end of the quarter, etc. You know, I want to enjoy my everyday life, and I make that very clear to them. You know, personally, first and foremost, what I expect from all of my team is just one thing, and that's to always bear in mind their mental and emotional well-being. And if they want to start a call with just saying, do you know what, I can't do this call today, it's been a big weekend and this happened, sure, no worries at all. We can knock it to tomorrow. We can do whatever you like. I would rather set that precedent that if you come to me about, you know, mental and emotional well-being, I'm going to take that with the utmost importance above anything else. So that's the first piece that I do. And the second piece that I do is, and I'm not sure whether I'm enjoying it just yet, I think I am, but I really encourage candid feedback. So you'll have to excuse the sort of in-joke here. There's a joke in UJET that I can't dance because I really can't. So we have a session on a Wednesday called Work It Wednesday. The work is spelt with an E, similar to twerk. So excuse the in-joke. But we have Work It Wednesdays, and you know, a lot of our demos that we do to clients, we record. You know, someone's always taking notes in internal meetings, whatever it may be, and we do a round robin around various different teams to say, right, what do we want to review in Work It Wednesday this week? And honestly, 9 times out of 10, it's a meeting that I've been leading, or someone has said, oh, I wonder why Ash did this, or I wonder why that happened. And so it's normally me that's under the grill, but it's great that I can sort of almost make myself vulnerable and hear that the team then take the control, because I hear then more about what is it they expect from leadership, what is it they want to see, what suggestions do they have, can we hold this meeting in a coffee shop, can't we do this one virtually, whatever it may be. So I think, you know, inviting yourself to be vulnerable and making it clear to people that what is paramount is mental and emotional well-being, because it is for us all. As much as we enjoy our careers, we all go home to family, friends, a dog, whatever it may be, plants that I keep murdering in the background. So we need to keep mental and emotional well-being at front of the class. And personally, that's how I've enjoyed working so far with you, Jeff.
Interesting. Loads of tips, and great to hear your stories. And yeah, maybe at an event soon we'll do some dancing and see just how great your dancing is.
I'll buy the drinks. You guys get dancing. I'll buy the drinks. No problem.
So a comment in the chat. So change is good. We have made changes even when they make no material positive impact, just to show staff they can influence their environment and the business. This can provide the enthusiasm to increase staff thinking about more and better innovation ideas. Now, you know, we've been talking a little bit there about engagement. And Rodney, I want to come to you. So if engagement is so important for innovation, how do you create? We've heard some of those ideas there, but we've heard quite a few ideas there around creating a safe space, but how do you create engagement in the contact center when you have got people working from home? I mean, it's absolutely not impossible. You know, the CCMA, we are a complete remote working team, but working remotely requires a different approach to when everybody is in the office all the time, doesn't it?
I guess so, yeah. It's a trick one, because I guess it depends on your organisation. I mean, you think about it, 3 years ago, we were still making the business case for working from home with big video, Cisco type arrangements that basically cost us an arm and a leg to kind of do whatever we did. And literally overnight, we were thrown into Zoom and anything else that we came along with. And now we're kind of almost like making the case to go back into the office, you know, is how it actually feels. So the world's kind of like spun full circle, isn't it, in terms of that? And I guess we're all still coming to grips to terms and getting the grips around, well, are we going to be home working? Are we going to be back in the office? Are we going to be hybrid? How much of it? How does it work? Et cetera, et cetera. So if I'm really honest, I think, and certainly conversations I've had with colleagues across the CCMA in terms of special interest groups that we've had and various other conversations, I've been very much a case of that everyone's still working that out, in my view. I don't know if anyone's absolutely cracked it just yet. If they have, then great. And then we've heard stories, haven't we, about people saying, well, we're going to insist everyone comes back in the office, or we're going to insist everyone stays at home. And is that right as well, in terms of that kind of forced approach versus that kind of, where do you want to take it? But I guess what I've also seen is actually where, I don't know, you sort of build enough of a pattern that's kind of like to kind of say, look, working from home is probably normal for most of us now. But there's people actually who absolutely thrive on getting together. So actually create that kind of event, I guess, for want of better words, for how do you get people to kind of get together in some sort of way, and whether that's fully in the office or hybrid or just, like this, turn something into an event as best you can. So I really like to, as Ashley's point there, around get to know how people are feeling. During the lockdown, I guess one of the questions we always asked was around the well-being of our people. We did actually ask that and continued. Have we forgotten that now that we're out of the lockdown and actually we're still working from home? So what's the difference really, other than perhaps, right, the virus might get us or not get us as badly, but actually in terms of that interaction with people, have we forgotten to kind of continue doing that, checking each other out to make sure everything's okay? And I think that then creates the stable place to start to have those conversations about being innovative and getting together and sort of building that culture again. So that's not the silver bullet, but I think it's one of those elements that I certainly remind myself every now and again about, well, actually, I still need to check out how people are feeling in that. And I think that kind of helps with that engagement. Maintaining that culture is different as well for me. I think the communication channels that we've got, I think we've had to work harder at it to actually understand how is it okay to actually interrupt somebody now actually when they're kind of online, or actually some people don't care, they just interrupt you more than ever, bombard you. Even if it says do not disturb, you still get kind of like a queue of things that come along later. So I think it's around sort of working out tolerances and actually what's the best way of working, and actually building that kind of sort of description and saying, look, if it says do not disturb, it really means it, but I'm absolutely available after this particular time. Or please crash the diary if you need to, because actually I know it's really important that if you're going to come to me, it's because you really need to. So I think it's almost set those boundaries up in a different way to perhaps how it would have been previously. And remember what it was like 3 years ago when we were back in the office. You didn't just barge into a meeting room just because you wanted, what you might have done, but some people wouldn't just barge in, but you'd find a way of actually making contact with someone. So just apply those rules on a virtual basis. And I think that's certainly what I do with my team, and we sort of work that way through, and people know, how it works and so on. And that generates that kind of respect and trust and safe boundaries, and, from there, and it kind of helps.
And it's interesting what you said that, going through COVID, we used to ask the question, are you okay? Because you knew that COVID was knocking on the door if it wasn't in the house. Although we might not be asking the question from a virus perspective now, where we are right now is, are you okay? Because the pressures are just incredibly different, but the pressures are still there. So I think it's still worth continuing that question. And Dan in the chat has shared, creating a safe space is key, but that's just the start. Building on that with encouragement and regular recognition is where a true innovation culture is created. That's interesting, regular recognition, but that's not it. This needs underpinning with investment from the business, allowing for no distractions and headspace to truly innovate. Belinda, do you want to respond to that comment? That there's some new ideas coming through there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the safe space, it should be hygiene. It should be a given. And by safe space, we're talking about psychological safety, obviously, this idea that people feel that they can be themselves, that they're truly welcome, that they're listened to, they're not putting their neck on the line by suggesting change, whatever that may be. So absolutely agree with Daniel. It would be so nice if that was just hygiene and everybody could expect that ever. What we know, Rodney, you've already touched on this, is unfortunately that isn't the case everywhere. But yeah, it should be the given, and it should be the foundation on which everything else is based. And recognition and encouragement and are fundamental, as you say. Also, there's the next bit. I think there's probably a bit in the middle between, if bear with me with this, if psychological safety is hygiene, it's there. That should be the foundation piece, and then regular recognition is up there. There's almost like a middle sort of on a ladder of things that just should be happening, which is being listened to. So you can't value, recognize, encourage people unless you're listening. And actually, in lots of organizations, we talk about employee listening all the time. Often, unfortunately, that's reduced down to, yes, we do an employee survey once a year, and then 6 months later we might mention it again, and then nothing ever happens. If that's where your organization, in terms of listening, that's not where it is anymore. That's not where it's at. Rather, listening should be, yes, those in getting the surveys and the pulse surveys are really, really important, but actually line manager listening, and actually the ability, or put another way, having a conversation and treating people like people who are independent and clever and people who can generate ideas is massively important. And I love Ray, it was said earlier that we've made changes even when no material positive impact results in those changes, but the immaterial positive impact, or the intangible impact, would be people feel better and they're more likely to speak up next time with an idea, or simply just telling you how they're feeling about something. So that's probably a bit of a rambling answer, but I'm in the same boat with you, Daniel. I think safe space is the foundational piece.
And touching on what he says there about recognition, one of the things that we see through the awards program is when people get that recognition, yes, it's motivating, and yes, it's it's a damn good feel good factor when when you're in the room and you're finalists, and if you win bronze, silver, or gold, it's fantastic. But the piece that we don't necessarily talk about, but we know happens, is that recognition then creates more ideas, because there is that desire to, right, what can we do now? What can we do different? What can we continue to improve? So I think I've obviously talked about that in the context of the awards, but breaking that down and doing that on a smaller scale, a daily basis, one-to-one, I think we'll still have that, yes, I want to do something different.
Yeah, if just sort of responding briefly to that, which is I know of an organisation who in their engagement survey, people said they didn't feel recognised and valued. So this organisation spent lots of money creating an internal awards programme and a dinner and everything, and then they ran their survey obviously a year later and asked the same question, and the dial hadn't shifted, because people didn't actually want a great big awards programme. They just wanted their manager to notice them and say thank you. The thank you is the smallest currency of change in lots of ways, isn't it? And that can really create this culture that can help to stimulate innovation. It's not going to get you there on its own, but it will get you some way.
And interestingly, I mean, I'm just looking at Ray's latest comment on the chat. Thank you, Ray. Some ideas there. And do you know what, just in this conversation, there'll be little tips, little nuggets of ideas and inspiration that people will go away and implement. And that's a form of innovation. So Ray's ideas, or what he's been doing. We set up remote coffee breaks with colleagues who would not normally work with, to share experiences. Those that join also get goodie parcels in the post to snack on during the session. I have to say, I do remember doing events where we would send things to members to get to enjoy while we were in a debate. Normally a member of the management team would host the discussion and make themselves available to answer questions. And those sessions have provided great insight. So I think that open conversation can really help. And Paresh has just commented, and I'm going to haven't pre-read this. People are easily motivated, in my experience. Just be a simple thank you. Good point. And being recognised for a job well done. It's the little things that build that sustainable culture. That's an interesting one. Just say thank you. So one of the things that we've touched on a little bit there, and with Ray's idea around remote coffee breaks. Do you think, Belinda, that having a hybrid working approach, where a flexible way of working, do you think that will or is having an impact on innovation?
I'm going to say yes. But actually, I suspect that it might be a yes in the opposite way. So I do think it's having an impact on innovation, but positively. There is a health warning with this as well. But for me, hybrid working means doing the right work in the right place. And some work is better done individually at home. If I know I'm speaking from a place of privilege, I have a space to work and not everybody does, so being mindful of that. But right work done in the right place at the right time in the right way, etc., etc. And actually, there are some just head down jobs that need to be done at home and that can be then work in a way that it's easy to balance your life, and you spend less hours commuting, more hours with your children, or more hours getting well and fitness, which stimulates ideas and all that good stuff. So there's lots of pluses of working that way. That said, there is a lot to be said for certain types of innovative activities, whether it's idea generation or problem solving, that are better done together. So hybrid means right work in the right place at the right time. It's not entirely remote or entirely in the office. So I think, does it impact innovation? Absolutely, 100% yes. I do think also watch out for, well, a few watch outs, and Rodney's already touched on them. If I think about EX, employee experience, it'd be things about watch out for, to really invest in connection and really reinforcing and telling that narrative of the organization, the meaning bit, so people are really connected to the purpose of the organization. Line managers are going to be more important than ever. How they manage, how they support, how they role model the sorts of conversations. So we don't just all jump on a Zoom, do the work and then jump off again. We do make that time to say, how are you, or whatever it may be. And also watch out for the blame game. There will continue to be an awful lot of negative press around remote or hybrid working, whatever whichever type you're talking about. And it will be blamed for a lot of issues that are already in the workplace anyway. And it's not actually hybrid that's causing the problem or remote that's causing the problem. Those problems are there, whether it was disengaged people, poor management, whether it was people being overstretched. Those problems were there before hybrid and remote working came along. So watch out for that blame game. But I think fundamentally, if you ask me, does it impact innovation? Yes, positively, but you need to be really conscious of some of the pitfalls as well.
So on the assumption that regardless of how you're operating, whether you are all in the office, all at home, hybrid, wherever you're working, if you've got that strong engagement, how do you start to stimulate that creativity and the ideas? What Belinda, do you advise people to do to try and get that stimulation going?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, sorry, a bit of repetition, it's about listening to people. So if you're not doing an employee survey of some description, do one. If you are doing and you do it every 1 year, do pulse surveys, etc., and encourage that listening and that dialogue. So don't just listen, play back. So that's my first starting point. Then I really like this word curiosity. For me, curiosity is a really good focus area to stimulate innovation. So think about questions. How, if you're a leader or a line manager or whatever in an organization, what questions are you routinely asking, and how are you modeling that behavior of asking questions? Because curiosity stimulates innovation, and asking questions are kind of like a building block of curiosity, if you like. So encourage habits around curiosity. So encourage people to ask questions. Make it really clear there is no such thing as a dumb question. There is only the question that hasn't been asked. Because if you think it's dumb, somebody else has got it as well. As a leader, reading widely, connecting with people outside of your usual zone. I think it was Ricardo, as you were talking about earlier, that back to the floor, work shadowing stuff, seeing how work gets done. So being curious about how things are happening in your organization, not just making assumptions. So for me, really encouraging employee listening and dialogue, not just one way, doing something with what you hear, and really role modeling the benefits of curiosity as a leader and encouraging those. Those would be my first starting points. There's much more I do next, but those would be my starting points.
No, interesting. Rodney, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I guess I've got a couple of thoughts on there. I think to your point there about reading outside the box, is a read around. I think do your research, look at what other organisations do, look at organisations who you admire, and definitely look outside of your own sector, I would say, to look at those alternative ways of doing what might work. And still with pride, I suppose, in terms of actually the best ideas that are there. But I think, again, one of those watch out points is don't just expect because it works there that it's going to work in my organisation. I think it's about understanding what made it happen there. You know, you can't just switch culture on. You know, that's the sort of stuff you've got to work at over time. You can turn an idea and influence something and buy something in, but that doesn't actually make it work and make it right. But if it does work for you, it's to actually build upon that, or actually just adapt it to kind of make it work for you, to kind of chip away at some of those kind of improvements, I suppose. So there's something in that for me. I think another thing as well for me is I've worked with a chap, I'm going to give him a little plug here, a fellow called Andy Gilbert. He's got his organisation called Go Mad Thinking. And one of the things that we talked about in the past is around in your thinking style, is don't narrow yourself into one particular way of doing things. So I could say to you, okay, how do I fill this cup with water or something? I don't know. And the answer is there basically, well, you just turn the tap on and obviously it fills up and off it goes, isn't it? But literally it's introducing one extra word, possible, in terms of possibilities. So actually, so how can I possibly fill this cup? Instantly, then it makes you start thinking, well, rather than just use the tap, I could use a hose, couldn't I? Well, not at the moment because the hose pipe ban, but you know, in terms of, but you could have done that, or I could use a jug to do something else, or I can get someone else to fill the cup for me, or I could do this, or I could do that. Instantly, you come up with more than one idea. So you've actually opened your thinking. So rather than just one closed way of operating, you've got 5 ideas. And they might be great, they might be different. The challenge is then to actually write down 20 ideas. And then when you get to 20, add another 20 and then keep going. And the way it sort of works, bizarrely, the way your brain works, and Belinda, you might have more of a view of actually how this actually works, is that at the beginning, you're a bit shy. And then after about 20, you're kind of warming up. So answer number 2021 is usually not bad. But when you push your boundaries a bit further, actually, when you get to answer 47 or 48, that's when it starts to make a difference. And your most creative ideas come out of that. And then you then go over your list and you go, which ones of those are actually worth a salt, you know, at all? Half a dozen might be. Those are the ones to go off and play with. And I've used that technique on many occasions to actually just stimulate a bit of fun, in an approach, especially when you're hitting a brick wall. And then you start throwing things like, well, if we run out of ideas, well, I don't know, you throw in other questions like, I don't know, think of a character or somebody who's either alive or not anymore, fictitious or real. What would they do? You know, so what would Mickey Mouse do in this scenario? It sounds bizarre and stupid, but actually that kind of animation of humor and bringing it into play, or actually someone that you admire. I don't know, what would I don't know, Winston Churchill do in this scenario, whatever it might be. But you start thinking differently about other ideas and the rest of it, and that sort of comes into play, and that really helps. And then the other question that I love as well, which actually is where I think where the innovation bit, we've only so far talked about. It feels like innovation comes out of one person. You know, I've had this idea, therefore it should continue, or it will fail, or it won't be adopted. Is when you're figuring out an idea, is ask the question, who could I possibly involve? And then just basically think about, well, put it from a point of view, getting a diverse view of thinking, you know, into a group. Well, actually, if I'm actually, I don't know, working in the contact center, I'm going to need someone that understands finances. But if I don't get it, who do I know who's friendly enough to kind of give me a perspective of that particular brief? So it actually means when we put the cost benefit analysis together, they'll tell me all the things I should have thought about before I get there. But if I'm not naturally creative, go find someone who might be, to actually throw in an alternative perspective of things. Put yourself in the customer's shoes. All those obvious things that aren't obvious when you're thinking of ideas is to do that. And that's how I think genuinely where collaboration kicks into play. And then it just stimulates to go further. And then you've not just got one person's ideas, you've got half a dozen people's ideas generating all those other thoughts, and off you go. So I think for me, it's a combination of those different things. And although they're kind of theoretical, when you actually play with those a little bit and actually have some fun, I think that's when the kind of innovation really starts to play, and you can thrive on that, you know? So yeah, so just a couple of ideas, I guess, from me on that.
Belinda, you look like you were going to respond to some of those ideas that Rodney was just sharing. Great ideas there, Rodney.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I think the quote is, to have a good idea, you need to have lots and lots of ideas. So idea generation and creating a safe space and the mindset and a bit of fun around that is really, really important. The other two elements we talk about when creating a great mindset for innovation in an organization around empathy. Rodney, you just touched on that. So actually not making assumptions about what other people want, but actually going and finding out and walking in their shoes, and particularly customer shoes, but also colleague shoes. And the last one is experimentation. This comes back to you can have, hundreds of ideas, land on your one great idea, but then you've got to translate that into something. And actually taking an experimentation mindset is really, really helpful. It's the difference between speccing something, building something that costs you £2 million and takes you 2 years, and then launching it and go, oh, bugger, it didn't work, versus actually what's the smallest possible thing that we can get out there to test and see people's response to that. And that could be as simple as a poster. Why don't we create a poster and pretend we're about to launch these things and then see what people think? So I think we talked earlier a little bit about sort of psychological safety, and there's often a sense of either ideas work or they don't work. Actually, they only don't work if you don't learn anything. So once you're trying something new, once you're getting into the implementation end of innovation, it's been really clear what you're testing and what you're seeking to learn from each step of this process. And we call that an experimentation mindset. And it stops you getting into that binary point of view. It's, we're going to launch it and it'll either succeed or it won't. It's like, well, everything will succeed if you learn from it, as long as you release it in sort of sufficiently small increments that you're not creating too much risk.
Interesting. Do you know what? I'm thinking about what's going to stop innovation from happening, and I'm going to reflect on some research that we did, actually supported by UJET earlier this year. But Ash, before I dive into that, one of the things that strikes me, and it came out in a conversation we had with some members over the summer, Ash, was the importance of the mindset of the leader, and the mindset of the leader within the contact center, within the operation, the mindset of the CEO. If the CEO is not innovative and driving that innovative thinking, is it possible to be innovative in the contact center? Ash, what's your take on the influence that a leader can have on how innovative people can be, or an organization can be?
Yeah, I think it's tricky, right? Because unfortunately, traditionally, we end up with those that are the most, longest tenured end up at the top, right? And I won't go into the fact that the majority of them are white and male as well, but the vast majority of senior leaders end up having been there a very, very long time, and they got there a certain way and they lived through a certain generation. So it's difficult to have those that are more innovative. They're tough to find, right? Unfortunately, we need to enable access and remove glass ceilings, et cetera, et cetera. That's another conversation. What I do think that we can do as team leaders, as middle management, as senior leadership, et cetera, is not just enable those conversations, but be an internal champion. Now, what we tend to do is keep it as too much of a microcosm, right? So we were talking earlier about recognition is incredibly important, and recognition is great, but recognizing great performance, great innovation, whatever it may be, and actually championing that person's story internally are two different things. And what I think that really dovetails into is actually making sure that we can minimize one of the highest risks to our contact centers, which is extremely high turnover. We know that's a fact in our industry. It has been for eons, right? Now, if we can get ourselves to a stage where actually as team leaders, middle management, senior leadership, et cetera, right the way up the tree, the responsibility falls on us as leaders to not only recognize great performance, but turn around internally when you're on those management calls, when you're on those team leadership calls, when you're on those senior leadership calls, whatever they may be, say, do you know what? I just wanted to share a great highlight from this week. Lee actually hosted a fantastic webinar. I thought she did a great job of involving everyone on the panel, whatever else it may be, to continue to invite that person further up the ladder, so to speak, because we're never going to get to a stage where we get those innovative leaders at the top that can encourage that type of change unless we champion those that are, unfortunately, in the sort of archaic way, further down the hierarchy, so to speak. So we need to flatten organizations so that it doesn't feel like it's some sort of hierarchy. And in doing so, we'll encourage that innovation to the table, right? And I think it's so bread and butter. It's so simple to do. In fact, I'll challenge everyone that's listening. Try to start meetings this week when you're in leadership calls. Try to start it by calling out something positive that happened in your team. And it can't be, my team did this week. Okay, just a caveat, you can't blow your own trumpet. That doesn't count. But, saying, hey, Belinda made a great point this week. Is it something we should explore? I thought Rodney led a call fantastically this week. Should we review his territory or his responsibilities? Try to start calls with that, and just see how the culture of that call alone will change. And I think that's how we can then take a stranglehold on whether we get innovative leaders in the industry or not. And I think we can, but it takes a lot of groundswell.
No, interesting. And I do wonder how much it comes from the leader to create that, and just hoping that if there is an innovation further up the tree, that actually people within the contact center feel comfortable in a safe place to be able to do that innovation. I did say that I'd mentioned some of the research, the barriers, and I do want to share them because I think they'll potentially resonate. But also I want to then ask you guys what your views are on how to overcome them. So the research that we did back in the summer, we identified 5 barriers to contact center innovation. The first one, as the impact of COVID recedes, it's all too easy to revert to pre-pandemic thinking. I think Ash, you mentioned that earlier, actually. Number 2, experience of previous unsuccessful projects can induce innovation cynicism. The third one, which actually I don't think we've touched on that on the conversation. The third one, focusing on traditional operational metrics without a clear focus on the customer experience. So maybe being limited by metrics. The fourth one, increasing systems fragmentation as customer data spreads across multiple channels. So not being able to get access to the data to support the development of innovation. We haven't even talked about data and what that might be able to do for us. And the fifth one was reliance on third parties can reduce visibility and lead to a lack of control. So other people getting into the mix. How on earth do you overcome these barriers? Belinda, what's your view? I want to come to you first. How do organizations people in the contact center overcome some of these barriers?
For me, a bit repetition, but it goes back to this idea of experimentation. That actually, a lot of these things are associated with this binary idea is you invest a lot of money and time building something very complex, you launch it, no, it didn't work, let's not try anything new ever again. Because actually, as soon as you shift your mindset into actually, how do we prototype this? How do we test this? How do we learn? And then how do we scale and iterate it? It reduces the risk and the fear. But like all culture change, this is a cultural mindset shift that will take time, and it's got to be modeled from the top downwards. I used to work in a creative agency, and the creative director there, he said, I never come to a meeting with a PowerPoint, I always come with a prototype. And he would literally, whatever it was he wanted to discuss, he would have something on the table that you could look at, touch, feel. And again, it could be a piece of paper with 3 words on it, but it was something much more tactile, and it just shifted your thinking away from that passive, I'm going to stare at your presentation and think about this, to actually, I'm going to pick this up and think about what this really means. I'm going to feel something from this. So experimentation reduces the fear of failure, it changes the language, and it reduces risk as well.
Interesting. Rodney, what's your advice?
Yeah, it's interesting your point there, Belinda, about try this idea, it didn't work before, and that's cynicism. I remember hearing once, some time ago, actually, someone saying, we did a pilot and it didn't work. Talk about unconscious bias straight from the start. No wonder it didn't work, in terms of what outcome were you looking for? So that still rings in my ear whenever anyone talks about pilots and the rest of it. I think, okay, let's be really clear about what are we trying to achieve here. I mean that in itself is probably a good place to start. I mean, in terms of being realistic about things and actually understanding, well, what's the best we're going to get? We don't have a mega budget. So what do we have, and what's the best possible outcome? If you start on a right to left approach, we are here today, that's where we want to get to. What will it take to get to that end point? And actually, what's the likelihood of getting there with what I've got? And let's be realistic about what we're going to get to next. And I think when you put that pragmatism into place and those practical steps, you start to get rid of all the frustration, because actually you're frustrated about, okay, I haven't got the budget, but what I will get is that, whatever that is, ultimately that you're going to go for. And is that going to be an improvement? Yeah, I guess so. Right then. So is it worth doing? Yes, no. Then and then you make your calls. And that way, I think someone said earlier in terms of the chat around making change happen, even if there isn't something that comes out of it. But even if it's a small change, it's a change, and it's stepping in the right direction. And perhaps in that you can prove yourself or prove the idea works, and then you might get the backing on it. So I think there's something in that to kind of chip away at those sorts of ideas and kind of like versions of what happens, and sort of work from there, really. But I think with that as well, I think I would say don't lose spirit and things. You know, don't just feel if that's all I can do. Is to actually think big, think wide, think over that sort of side of it, and then say, well, you know, what would it possibly do? You know, what do I have to do to kind of get to that place, and then see what happens. You know, so be creative, because ultimately you may not be there today, but you might be there later. So
it's interesting. Daniel's put in the chat, labeling something as a failure is the wrong way of looking at things. It's a learning and a step closer to finding the correct solution. And interestingly, and I'm not necessarily an advocate of this, but I do hear people say, well, I'm just going to try it and I'll seek forgiveness later if it's, you know, not going to have too much of an impact on money or anything like that. Yeah, I'll seek forgiveness later. Ash, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just very quickly to elaborate on what Rodney said, the amount of times I've heard in my time, do you do pilots? How much does it cost? It's immediately, you know, what's the sort of, you know, the easy way out rather than the easy way to investigate something, right? And something that I always encourage prospects and customers to do is a very, very, very simple exercise of writing down the top 5 or 6 things that are your current state. That might be ability to integrate or not integrate, ability to get data or not get data, whatever that may be, however manual a task may be, whatever it is. List those 5 or 6 things that are your current state, and then list the flip side of what would your nirvana be. If you could create anything you liked, any process, any platform, anything in the world, and measure those up to one another, then say, right, we know what we're actually trying to go afterwards, and we know the problems that currently are in our organization. At least then you have a starting point of why are you making this change? Why are you looking to embark on a culture change, a technology change, an investment change, whatever it may be? Because I feel all too often that it feels to me anyway as if people sort of look around and go, oh, maybe it's time. We should probably look at new solutions for culture, for tech, for whatever it may be. And then it's the easy option of, oh, it costs quite a lot. Could we get a pilot? How do we sort of, you know, what's the easy way out? So I would agree with Rodney on the fact that, you know, looking straight at a pilot is just, oh, we'll just sort of dip our toe in the water. It's never a realistic comparison of where you are and where you're trying to go. Interesting.
So we're nearly at time. So I want some final words of advice, and maybe there's some key things that have come out today. Ash, I'm going to come back to you first. What's your final word of advice?
Sure. Short and sweet from me. I beg all of you, start leadership meetings that are not involving your team. If it's senior leadership, middle management, whatever it is, start those meetings with a positive about a team member of yours, because otherwise this high turnover in contact centers is going to continue. We need to maintain the knowledge, and we need to maintain a culture of innovation. And we only do that by helping those from the entry level to climb the ladder, so to speak. So please do that this week.
Great. Lots of positive stories, lots of positivity. Love it. And I'm going to go to Belinda.
Thank you. And yeah, start talking to your people about what would make a better experience for them at work. And believe me, it's not about money. Money is a hygiene factor. I know in an age of hyperinflation, so that's a slightly weird thing to say, but experience is about how you make people feel, how you make them feel that they belong, and how you energize them. So start having conversations with your people about what could be better in their experience at work, and then do something about it.
Yes, feedback loops. Rodney, what's your final piece of advice?
I think I'd sort of go back to my point around about explore the possibilities. Whether or not you take this to an experiment thereafter is another point, but I think don't just limit yourself just to that one way of doing it, especially if it's failed in the past. If someone's told you that, you'll never get anyone to believe you. I think it's around just kind of keep that going, be wide thinking about those points, and then drill it down and give it a go.
Thank you so much. You guys have been brilliant. Thank you so much, Ash, Rodney, and Belinda. This has been fascinating, and I hope that it has really inspired you to go in and look at how you can be more innovative in your culture. There are more tips and advice on a good practice guide that we are launching today that UJET has kindly supported, and it is how to create a culture for innovation in your contact center. And we will make this webinar also available for you to watch again, maybe share with your teams. So look out for a link to all of that. Follow us on LinkedIn for all of that. For now, thank you so much. Thank you for participating in the chat. Really appreciate all your thoughts and ideas in there. Thank you guys, Belinda, Ash, and Rodney, for all of your contributions. And thank you, UJET, for enabling us to have this conversation. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.